almost 2 months now, Indian and Chinese troops are in a tense standoff at the Doklam Plateau. China's statements continue to be shrill and threatening. A Chinese commentator was quoted saying that China could carry out a small-scale military action if India did not immediately and unconditionally withdraw our troops. India, of course, is standing firm, polite, yet determined, seeking a diplomatic solution to the standoff and a mutual withdrawal. But hope cannot just be the only strategy. The army has carried out an exercise comparing the adversary's strength and weaknesses vis-a-vis our strength and weaknesses. India Today's Shruti Ranjan Sen gets you the inside track of India's thinking. Let's begin with the eastern sector. In the eastern sector, in Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, India has an edge over China, both in terms of numbers and terrain. Overall too, India is well provided for in terms of troops and equipment. China will need to send at least 9 times more soldiers to be able to dislodge the Indian army. I will tell you more about this in just a moment, but let's for a moment just talk about the middle sector and the western sector. In a moment, I want to bring in India Today's Shruti Ranjan Sen for more on this story. Shruti Ranjan Sen got us this story. Also joining us on the broadcast is General Bikram Singh, former Chief of the Army Staff. Shruti, bring us details. This is the thinking of the Indian Army. You've accessed their thinking. Bring us details.
Well, to begin with, I mean, with General Bikram Singh being on the show, he would know much better because he would have, been part of this entire exercise. But broadly, without giving out too much of details, what we have been told is that the entire sector, whether it is the eastern sector, the middle sector, or even your western sector, that is the Ladakh sector, except a couple of sectors, say the Depsang Plains or the Chumur area, we have an overwhelming superiority. And as you were saying, the number, we have done this gaming and where we look at, what could be the possibilities that China would do, what will be our reaction, how do we respond. In that, what we are getting to understand is because unlike China, we hold on to the heights, our troops are sitting on the heights, and whereas Chinese troops are positioned much, much inside of their territory, we have an advantage. To dislodge our soldiers, they would have to send, depending on the sector, at least 9 and in some sectors 12 soldiers to dislodge 1 Indian soldier. That is the kind of superiority you're talking about. Okay. Not only that.
Okay, give me a moment. Let me bring in the General for more on this. We'll go to the western sector in just a moment. But General, your appreciation of the situation, especially at a time when Chinese statements continue to be extremely shrill, whether it's their army, their diplomats, or their commentators who now say that, within 2 weeks there could be perhaps a short, sharp skirmish.
Yes, Gaurav, one has been observing that a number of bellicose, a number of belligerent statements have come from across from China on the situation. And I must say that I must compliment our media, which has been very, very balanced in reporting, very mature, very pragmatic in reporting. And I think that's how it should be. Because I feel that in such situations where there is an impasse, let's not look at force as the first option. Force should be the last option, consequent to the optimal utilization of diplomatic channels. And I think I'm certain that both sides are working at the diplomatic level to find a way out to make sure that the force is not utilized. But yes, when you talk of combat power, yes, your magazine had covered last week various combat ratios, and even now your commentator is bringing out the combat potential on the eastern theater. He's done a research with regard to central and the western sector. But let me bring out, let's not go by bullet to bullet, tank to tank, RTPs to RTPs.
Okay.
Wars, when you look at it, they do take into consideration the combat power from the point of view of what the enemy has got, what the adversary has got. And mind you, China is not enemy at the moment. I'm talking the wording they use, adversary, should it come to that. At the moment, it's a peer nation.
Yes.
It's a peer competitor. It's a neighbor of ours. And things are pretty okay with it. What I'm coming to is that, when you calculate combat power, there are large number of, imponderables, large number of intangibles, which are not accounted for. Intangibles, for example, from the point of view of strategy, operational art, leadership, morale, your will to fight. there are a large number of factors which come into play when you actually calculate combat power, and therefore these are force multipliers. Leadership is a force multiplier.
Yes.
You know, will to fight is a force multiplier. Morale is a force multiplier. So when you see these force multipliers, they have got to be factored in appropriately when you look at combat power.
Okay.
And yes, as
let's take this bit by bit, General.
The combat ratios are required to be more because you are going uphill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is that should the balloon go up, and
Yeah,
God forbid,
mention.
China would need many more troops than they have currently deployed.
No, look, I said, you know, if push comes to shove, that's the last resort. I am saying that if you have to use force, then there is no other option but to hold on to your ground and fight it out. But I suppose we'll be able to find a solution prior to that. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
But from the point of view of combat power, the Indian Army is not, at the moment in a situation that it cannot, dig its heel and protect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity and the commitment that is given to its one of the neighbors.
Good point you've made there. Now, in the western sector, let's talk about eastern Ladakh. Now, India has activated our airfields. Armored assets have already been deployed, and not because of the current standoff, but they're anyways deployed there. So, should the Chinese try something there, General, how do things fare? Because we've seen what happened in Chumar, we've seen what happened in Depsang. Those were transgressions. This, if at all something happens, would be far more serious, General.
No, look, I would like to tell the viewers, through your medium, through your channel, that look, let's not look at the situation as a nail that hammer is the only answer. Let's look at diplomatic negotiations. Even the Honorable Prime Minister has made a mention about it. And I think we've got to be working, we've got to be looking at the high levels of political and diplomatic ingenuity to be able to diffuse the situation. And I'm sure they'll be able to find a way out. But yes, when you look at a situation like this, Gaurav, please understand it is at the tactical level. It's at the lower level. So let's not look at this tactical situation being blown into a situation which is going to be warlike. And I made a mention once or twice earlier on various shows that the use of force also goes along a particular hierarchy. It starts off from a duel, it comes to an engagement, battles, campaign, and then war. It escalates along this particular ladder, and therefore you have enough mechanisms to be able to ensure that perhaps you can stem the tide at some point of time to make sure it does not proliferate beyond a point and it remains localized. But that's in a situation when there is the use of hostility, which I personally feel, given the far-sighted agenda, the long-term agenda of both the countries, and there is, mind you, adequate strategic space in the region to be shared by both the giants, both the emerging regional powers. So I don't think force is
but China's infrastructure development, General, and I want to bring in Shudi. Shudi, China's infrastructure development has been far faster and better than ours. So how does this study compare the infrastructure? We talk about teeth to tail ratio, but they may not have as many troops deployed. They can quickly move them either by air or by road or by rail, Shudi.
Well, I mean, that is a possibility. Their infrastructure is much better. But mind you, in most of these areas, and that's what we are getting to hear, whether it is, the eastern sector, the central sector, or the western sector, these areas are under our watch. In fact, if you talk about Tibet and you're talking about, say, Ladakh, these are flat countries in very many places, and, which we can sit where we sit, we are watching. And as he moves, it will not be very easy for him to A, move his soldiers, B, move the supplies, C, keep them there, keep them sustained. Because their lines will then, kind of stretch. They will be under our observation, and therefore once we can observe, we can also interdict and disrupt those lines of communication. That is number one.
Okay. General, lot of shrill statements coming from China, not just from their commentators, but also from their diplomats, and perhaps more a cause for concern, their army. Now, since they've painted themselves in a corner, what are China's options, General?
Look, Gaurav, whenever there is an impasse of this kind, nations resort to posturing. Remember this, because impasse is there because both sides have stated their position, which at the moment is non-negotiable. And when this kind of an impasse is there, there is posturing by nations. Look at, for example, United States and Iran. This posturing has gone on almost for a decade now. You find the statements coming from Iran, you find statements coming from United States. Same is the case over here, but it does not mean for a number of years over there nothing has happened. Same may be the case over here. This is part of posturing which has a power in itself. And nations resort to that as part of the prelude, I would say, to the use of force. So let's not take it for granted that just because those statements are coming. These statements are coming basically to I would say, a psychological kind of a warfare which is being undertaken to intimidate. After all, what are you doing? When you use force, with what intent are you using? You are using with the intent to assert your will onto the adversary.
Okay.
So if it is going to be done by force, this is preceded by such statements which are aiming towards intimidating you to listen to what Chinese are saying.
Okay, but you know, India has also made it very clear.
Our media has exercised tremendous maturity, and I think that's how it should continue.
And it will, you know, despite very shrill statements coming from China, India has responded in a very measured manner. But General, you know, should they forcibly try to evict our troops, or should they try to take, you know, occupy one of the unheld features, if not here, elsewhere, either in Barahoti or in Chumar or Depsang or somewhere else in eastern Ladakh? What are India's options? Do we also go and occupy some unheld features and then negotiate and resolve that revolving door policy, General?
Look, I'm certain, you know, Gaurav, that I do not think that Chinese would resort to a strategy of indirect approach, that is trying to put pressure elsewhere to make us, you know, recoil from this area of Doklam. I don't think they will do that. If they have to do something, they will do it in Doklam. You see, the point is, let's be very clear. Here, Bhutan is involved. We have the third party which is involved. Along the remainder border, you have very robust mechanisms along the LAC, which have got the capability to diffuse any situation. There is large amount of, you know, tremendous amount of bonhomie on the line of control. Things are not all that bad, especially after the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement of 2013. You have very, very comprehensive, you know, do's and don'ts and an architecture within which both the sides operate. So that will preclude anything happening, I personally feel. And also given the wisdom that at the strategic level, you know, there are larger gains for both the nations. Let's not be viewing in a very myopic manner that perhaps a small tactical operation of this kind is going to make India and China perhaps derail their, you know, pursuits of becoming a regional and global power. Both countries are aspiring to become regional and global power, and I do not think that they would deviate from their, you know, their stated goals.
Okay. China, of course, has been hostile when it comes to India's entry to the nuclear suppliers group, or, you know, they've extended the technical hold on Maulana Masood Azhar. Shruti, you've been speaking to your sources in the security establishment. Some were talking about, you know, some kind of a cyber offensive, a cyber attack. Are we well geared up to deal with that, Shruti?
Well, I mean, cyber attacks on Indian, say, cyber, you know, installations have been happening for some time. Some have been, in fact, there have been suspicion expressed that it has been coming from the northern side. If you look at the cyber infrastructure that is there, it's quite robust in a way. Although, you know, as you put up your defenses, there are loopholes found, and those are used again. And it is not only for India. It's happened in the United States, and it happens across the country, across the world. So it's a cat and mouse game that goes on.
Okay.
And we need not be, you know, unnecessarily or unduly worried about, you know, a massive cyber attack coming and debilitating, say, either our power network or our banking system or our air traffic control. That doesn't seem to be, you know, a possibility yet.
Okay. So, General, will this go on for some time, or since there's a BRICS summit happening in September, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is to travel to China as a student of military strategy and warfare, do you see a solution, or do you see a prolonged standoff?
No, a standoff would be there. It may be slightly longish, but I'm certain that they'll be able to find a political and diplomatic solution to this entire thing. And yes, you know, as Sudhir mentioned, there are options as far as the cyber, you know, arena is concerned. Look at, for example, you know, United States and Iran. It's your, you know, this magazine which I had covered, Raj Chingappa had covered the use of Stuxnet, you know, by United States against Iran. Though, of course, United States, you know, denied it. It has deniability. The use of cyber warfare has a tremendous degree, a great degree of deniability. And that's the reason perhaps nations resort to this. So perhaps a use of this cannot be ruled out. China today possesses prodigious potential to be able to control global networks and target them ad lib when required. So I think we should be cautious. We should have our defensive measures in place. That notwithstanding, I think our initiatives at the diplomatic and political level must continue. I hope that the BRICS will be able to perhaps find a way out and diffuse the situation.
General, every difficult situation is also an opportunity. Adversity is an opportunity. Now, there are various gaps in our modernization, whether it's infrastructure or weapons and equipment. Can this be an opportunity for the government and the armed forces to speed up either acquisition or putting systems in place?
Yes, absolutely. Let's be very clear. I got an impression that perhaps there was a kind of a misplaced hypothesis, which was gaining ground, that there'll be no conventional wars. I think we should not be living with that kind of a hypothesis and that kind of a deduction. We should be looking at asymmetric warfare, which is the warfare of today and tomorrow. But that notwithstanding, conventional wars are very much there on the horizon. We should not rule them out. And therefore, there's a need to prepare for these. And as far as China is concerned, as far as India as a regional power, which has to have a compatible army if it has to become a regional and a global power, a compatibility required, we've got to be looking at all the 5 dimensions of modernization, of transformation. That is your land, air, sea, your cyberspace and space. Mind you, China is developing, kinetic weapons even in space to take on and jam various, satellites of ours. So we got to be looking at this, and therefore, from that point of view, perhaps it's a right time, perhaps, to revitalize, or I would say, revamp the proposal which was there, move it out from the files, which have gained dust on the space command, on the cyber command. We've got to be moving ahead on this and to make sure that our combat power is definitely honed. And cyberspace-wise, yes, we need to have our dedicated specific command, or the NTRO is looking after the nation. But I think there's a need to look at, in a very focused manner, the requirements, both defensive and offensive, of the military. They are totally different from the other requirements of cyberspace. It must be understood. While defensive measures, there's an overlap. Offensive, after taking permission of the government, the military should have the autonomy to take on the target at lib. And I think that is what is required, and that is a potential which both, I would say all the 3 services should be getting in unison under the umbrella of a cyber command and space command.
Okay, and shouldn't be concerned about the belligerent statements coming from China, because on ground, the status quo remains general. Closing comments, sir.
As I said earlier, we got to be prepared for such bellicose, such belligerent statements. They will come. They are part of posturing. This posturing is basically to deter the adversary and to intimidate and assert your will onto the adversary. It will happen. It will continue. But I think we need to continue to exercise prudence, maturity, remain balanced in our media reportage, which has been excellent hitherto, I must say. And I think we have tried to cool down the temperatures. We have only given a clear, explicit message that, remember, if push comes to shove, we shall be able to take on any contingency in any situation. But
perhaps
we are not looking at
also realizes that.
At the use of force. The Prime Minister has said, I think we should be looking at a diplomatic situation.
Differences,
sorry?
Absolutely. And perhaps the adversary also realizes that, and as the Prime Minister said at Astana, differences should not become disputes. Now, Sudhir Ranjan, many thanks for accessing that report here for India Today, that India does not need to be concerned when it comes to defending our borders. The security forces, the armed forces have all that they require and are well deployed. General, many thanks for joining me. A quick break. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.